بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين وبعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. المعقد الثالث العشر أو الثالث عشر, the 13th chapter, بذل الجهد في تحفظ العلم والمذاكرة به والسؤال عنه. So putting your efforts into memorizing or seeking to memorize knowledge and studying it and asking about it. إذا تلقيه عن الشيوخ لا ينفع بلا حفظ له ومذاكرة به والسؤال عنه، فهؤلاء تحقق في قلب طالب العلم تعظيمه بكمال الالتفات إليه والاشتغال به. فالحفظ حلوة بالنفس والمذاكرة جلوس إلى القرين والسؤال إقبال على العالم. So he's saying that for the students of knowledge, the ones that are seeking it from the scholars, they do not benefit without memorizing. Like if you study different subjects and you don't memorize anything from what you study, you're not really benefiting from it. It's just going in one ear and out the other ear. You don't if you read a book and you don't take anything from it to keep in memory, you're not benefiting from it. So he's saying that to truly benefit from what you're studying, you have to memorize, you have to study it, and you have to ask about it. And this is how you'll establish the knowledge in the heart of the student who is seeking to respect and make great knowledge and sanctify knowledge in its entirety, basically. So فالحفظ خلوة بالنفس. So memorizing is when you're staying by yourself and memorizing the text itself. This is when you do on your own pace. And then مذاكرة is when you're sitting with your fellow students, studying with each other, practicing back and forth. And then السؤال is when you're meeting with the scholar or the teacher to ask him questions about what you're studying. And you need these three components to have proper knowledge and proper understanding. فالحفظ يقرر العلم في القلب وينبغي أن يكون جل همة طالب العلم مصروف إلى الحفظ والإعادة كما يقوله ابن الجوزي رحمه الله تعالى في سيد الخاطر. ولم يزل العلماء والأعلام يحضون على الحفظ ويأمرون به. He's saying that for the student of knowledge, his main goal, like in the beginning of seeking knowledge, is to memorize. Right? You should memorize as much as you can. And that's why the scholar, the great scholar named Ibn Jawzi, rahimahullah, he wrote Sayyid al-Khatir, which is a beautiful book about like his thoughts and reflections upon, the different subjects. He said that it's the ulama or the scholars of the ummah are continuously encouraging people to memorize, right? Because memory is the key to knowledge. وقال عبيد الله بن الحسن وجدت أحضر العلم منفعة ما وعيته بقلبي ولكنته بلساني. He's saying that as Ubaydullah ibn Hassan, I found the most benefit in seeking knowledge with holding it in my heart and repeating it upon my tongue. Right? So the scholars, they say, commenting on this, is that when you're memorizing, it's ideal to be in a quiet place and recite out loud. The more he said, like, وَلَكَنْتُهُ بِلِسَانِي, like I move my tongue a lot, meaning you said it, reciting it out loud. So when you're using different resources for hifz, it makes your hifz stronger. So if you're using your eyesight to look at it and your tongue to repeat it out loud, the more likely it is the knowledge will stick with you. Right? When you're studying and trying to understand, then you would read with a softer voice and like, with more concentration in terms of what your the understanding part. But the hifz part, you want to do it with a loud voice on your own, to be using as many senses as you can for the hifz to stick. وسمعت شيخنا ابن عثيمين رحمه الله تعالى يقول حفظنا قليلا وقرأنا كثيرا فانتفعنا بما حفظنا أكثر من انتفاعنا بما قرأنا ليس بعلم ما حوى القمطر ما العلم إلا ما حوى الصدر. He says that his sheikh, one of his scholars, and also like almost similar ages, Ibn Uthaymeen rahimahullah told him that we memorized a little and we read a lot, and we benefited a lot more from what we memorized. And the famous poem is that knowledge is not that which is contained in the bookshelves, but real knowledge is that which is contained in the heart. Right? So you can have a bookshelf of 1,000 books and you might have read every single book on the bookshelf, but if you can't remember anything from that, what is the benefit? Right? So Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen, he memorized a lot, but he's comparing himself to maybe some of the great scholars and being humble. He said that we memorized a little, but we read a lot, and we benefited a lot more from what we memorized. Meaning that was something that you can carry with you anywhere you go and understand it and comprehend it and teach it, without having to go back to the books. Whereas those that depend on the books, if they lose the book, then they lose the knowledge. So real knowledge, according to the scholars, is that which is in the heart, in the minds. والمتلمس للعلم لا يستغنى عن الحفظ ولا يجمل فيه أن يخلى نفسه منه وإذا قدر على ما كان يصنع ابن الفرات رحمه الله فليأخذ به فقد كان لا يترك كل يوم إذا أصبح أن يحفظ شيئا وإن قل ومن عاقل هذا المعنى لم يزل من الحفظ في ازداد فلا ينقطع عنه حتى الموت كما اتفق ذلك لابن المالك رحمه الله صاحب الألفية النحوية فإنه حفظ في يوم موته خمسة شواهد. And he said that those that are trying to understand this chapter of increasing our memorization of knowledge, we should take heed of such scholars as Ibn Furat rahimahullah, and how he used to take he wouldn't leave a day except that he would memorize something. Like every day of his life he had a goal that he would memorize something, even if it was little, but he would memorize, right? He won't leave a day. And with that he has memorized so much, towards the end of his life. The more that you memorize, the easier it becomes to memorize. If you start with a small amount and you build on it, it becomes easier and easier, and then you can start getting more and more amounts, and we'll give you some examples. So he said also that Ibn Malik rahimahullah, the one who did the Alfiyah ibn Malik, on the day of his death he memorized 5 examples or proofs for his grammar. Right? Can you imagine? He's an old man, he's about to die on his deathbed, and he memorized 5 more proofs before he died. That's how much hifz is important to the scholars. From also his famous Nahwi scholar Ibn Hisham, he wrote Awdah al-Masalik and Al-Mughni al-Labib, which are explanations of Alfiyah ibn Malik. He was known to be also a great scholar. In the end of his life, he became a Hanbali. He was a Shafi'i for most of his life. Then he changed into a Hanbali. And at that time, he decided to memorize, Mukhtasar al-Kharaqi, which is like a multi-volume work. At the end, he must have been in his 70s or 80s, and he memorized several volumes of fiqh at that time, because his memory, he had trained his memory from youth to be able to memorize a lot. So he changed the whole madhab and he memorized the whole new madhab. Right? Also, it's reported that Abi Faraj ibn Jawzi rahimahullah, he was 80 years old and he decided that he wanted to learn the qira'at, the 10 different methods of reciting the Quran. So at 80 years old, he memorized and learned all the 10 qira'at of the Quran at 80 years old. And the scholars, they say that, in terms of training yourself, it's like muscles. How you start with smaller weights, your muscles get used to that, and you add some more weight, and you increase, and you keep increasing and growing and getting stronger, right? Knowledge is even more important to do that methodology, and knowledge and hifz has more capability than muscles. Because eventually with muscles, sometimes you max out. It's hard for a person to go squat more than, I don't know, what is it, the record, 1,000 pounds now. You can't, once you reach that level, mashallah. But with hifz, it's something you can continuously do. And it continuously, it's a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that the more you do it, the more it becomes easier. So you find people, you might start with 1 verse or 1 line a day. Then after a couple of weeks, maybe 2 lines, 3 lines, and you keep continuing to the point where you can, inshallah, get to these imams where they memorize whole books. It was said he did that in Mukhtasar al-Kharaqi, which is several volumes. Memorized it in 5 months at the age of 70 or 80. The whole several volumes. And it's not just like the Quran, smooth or some of the ahadith, but it's like some very technical stuff in the writings of fiqh. And he memorized the whole book. And like the scholar Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah says, العبرة بكمال النهاية لا بنقص البداية. So the sign or the point, العبرة, is how you end it, not how you start it, right? Kamal al-nihaya, the completion of the end, not nuqsan al-bidaya, not the shortcomings in the beginning. Because when we start, it's tough for anybody, and there'll be shortcomings. But is it more important that you're sabr, you're patient, and you continue, and then how you end your life? Like these imams, would you have ikhlas, inshallah, and you completed the Quran, you completed the books of ahadith, and you end like that. That's what counts. Like never giving up. You can't jump from, like a student going from kindergarten to 8th grade without studying elementary school, right? Or an 8th grader jumping into college without going through high school. It's the same thing with ilm. Like you can't, in hifth also, you can't expect to memorize the whole, like some people try to memorize all this stuff at one time and it's new to them and they're unable to and they give up. That's the shaitan trying to trick them, right? Or they try to, they're interested in one thing one day and they start memorizing, then they, this is not that great. Another friend said, you should memorize this, so they leave that, they go start memorizing this. Then another friend tells them, no, you should memorize this, then they leave that and go memorize this. At the end of the day, they'll memorize nothing, they didn't complete anything, right? So, the beginning should be correct, the methodology should be correct. You pick certain texts, stick with it, memorize it, understand it, then move on to the next text, right? وبالمذاكرة تدوم حياة العلم في النفس ويقوى تعلقه بها والمراد بالمذاكرة مدارسة الأقران وقد أمرنا بتعاهد القرآن الذي هو أيسر العلوم. He's saying also with the studying, the more you study it, the more likely it was that knowledge will stay with you, right? And this is like when you study with companions that help you, that also helps you to keep the knowledge more. Like if you learn something, memorize something, and teach it to somebody else or practice it with somebody else, the more likely it'll stay in your heart. And he mentioned that with the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, قال البخاري رحمه الله حدثنا عبد الله بن يوسف قال أخبرنا مالك عن نافع عن ابن عمر رضي الله عنه أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال إنما مثل صاحب القرآن كمثل صاحب الإبل المعلقة إن عاهد عليها أمسكها وإن أطلقها ذهبت. رواه مسلم من حديث مالك به ونحوه. He's saying that in this hadith the Prophet ﷺ told us that the person of the Quran, when you memorize Quran, is like the camel that you have tied, right? If you keep reciting and repeating and practicing and reviewing with each other the Quran, you will keep it. It'll stay firm in your heart. But if you let it go, if you stop practicing, if you stop memorizing, if you stop reviewing, it'll run away like the camel will run away if you took off its rope, right? أشد تفلة, it's more likely to run away than you, then this camel will run away without the rope being tied down, right? So the scholars, they say that if this is the case of the Quran, and Allah says, وَلَقَدْ يَسَّرْنَا الْقُرْآنَ لِذِكْرٍ فَهَلْ مِن مُذَكِّرٍ, that we've made memorizing the Quran easy for you. Is there someone to memorize it or understand it? Imagine with other stuff that you memorize, right? So it's so important to practice what you memorize and review it and teach it, and review with each other. So it's more likely to stay in your heart. قال ابن عبد البر رحمه الله تعالى في كتاب التمهيد عند هذا الحديث وإذا كان القرآن الميسر للذكر كالإبل المعلقة من تعهدها أمسكها فكيف بسائر العلوم. So Ibn Abdul Bar is actually saying this statement that if this is the case, commenting on this hadith, if this is the case with the Quran, which is easy to memorize or made easy to memorize for us, what is, that's like the camel that will run away if you don't practice it. How about with other knowledges, other sciences, other texts? وكان الزهري رحمه الله تعالى يقول إنما يذهب العلم النسيان وترك المذاكرة. Knowledge is dissipated from you, taken away from you through forgetfulness and not practicing what you've studied, not studying or reviewing what you learned. Right? This is how knowledge dissipates from the scholar or from the people. وبسؤال, so this is the first part, memorizing. The second part, مذاكرة, reviewing what you studied and practicing with other people's, other students, helping each other. And then the third part, وسؤال عن العلم تفتح خزائنه, and asking about the knowledge will open up the treasure chest of knowledge, right? So the basic part of knowledge is memorizing it, and then understanding, like having a basic understanding. Then you ask the scholars for explanation, and then it's like the treasure chest is open up for you, and you have like the key to real knowledge. it builds upon your understanding and it increases your understanding, and you have a complete picture of that knowledge. وحسن المسألة نصف العلم والسؤالات المصنفة كمسائل أحمد المروية عنه برهان جلي على عظيم منفعة السؤال. And he says that the question, or the correct question, is half of knowledge. Knowing how to ask the proper question with the proper etiquette at the proper time from the proper person is a key to getting proper knowledge, a beneficial knowledge. And he said that this is the case of the scholars before us. He mentioned Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, how he used to have a whole book of questions he asked his teacher. And it shows us the hikmah and the wisdom of the scholars, how they ask the questions. Very beneficial questions. Not wasting time, not like repeating stuff that's already clear, but questions that are need to explain. Not questions that are like unnecessary or distracting issues, but key essential issues. That's the true scholar and the true student of knowledge. He knows how to ask the proper question. And Imam Malik also has a book. It's called the Mudawwana. It's actually the students of Imam Malik. They asked him questions, and they have the whole books and chapters of fiqh based upon these questions and answers. Right. So the first part hifz, second part mudhakara, the third part su'al, asking. وقيدة الإقبال على العالم بالسؤال إذا ورد على بلد تكشف مبلغ العلم فيه فهذا سفيان الثوري رحمه الله يخدم أسقلان فيمكث ثلاثا لا يسأل إنسان عن شيء فيقول لراد ابن الجراح أحد أصحابه أكثر لي أخرج من هذا البلد يموت فيه العلم. So he's saying that one of the ways that you can look and tell that a place or a town has knowledge is by the scholars in it that are able to answer the questions, right? And if there's somebody there available to answer your question, or the scholar has the capability to answer the question. So he said, it reported one of the statements how Imam Sufyan al-Thawri went to a place and he stayed there for 3 days, and nobody came to ask him a question at all. And he's like a known scholar, or a great scholar. So another person heard of this, and he said to him, like, basically, leave this town because the knowledge dies in it. So you have like a scholar available to you, or a teacher available to you, and no one takes advantage of it, or no one goes to ask questions, and increase their knowledge. It's like this town is dead. Like, leave it, go somewhere else that you can benefit the people from and benefit yourself more from. And he talks about some of the scholars of the past, how they would, travel for maybe weeks or months to try to ask, certain questions they didn't have the answer for, to get certain narrations of the hadith. And this shows their keenness on seeking knowledge and the beauty of respecting the knowledge and sacrificing for knowledge. I think that's one of the reasons that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed our salaf of the ummah, because of the sacrifice they made in seeking knowledge. Not only with their sincerity, but the efforts and the struggle they went to get the knowledge. They really sacrificed leaving their family, leaving wealth, status, whatever it was, to go and humble themselves and travel, whatever the hardship is, to get even just the answer to one question, or to, get a narration of a hadith they didn't have, or they had the narration but they just wanted to make sure it's the correct sanad. This is like the effort of the scholars, rahimahullah, that they had, and that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed them in their knowledge. Nowadays, unfortunately, we have like so much access to knowledge, but we're not taking advantage of it. It's easy for us, so we take it, may Allah forgive us, like cheaply. It's not like a commodity that's not that valuable. It's at our fingertips, right? So when you have something so easily, readily available, sometimes people take it for granted and they don't try to appreciate it as it should be appreciated. It is, and that's one of the signs of the time. Like the Prophet ﷺ said, there will not come a time except after him, except the time after it will be worse than this time. And Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu, he commented on this hadith saying that this is with the taking of knowledge, taking of the scholars. So we see how many scholars we had in the past compared to how many scholars we have now. This is the sign of the Day of Judgment. Like, knowledge will be taken by the taking of the ulama, of the scholars. And that's why when there is a scholar available or a teacher available, somebody who is a Muslim, practicing Muslims should try their best to learn from them as much as they can, before they're gone, because you can't get that knowledge back. Some of the things to help for memorizing, the scholars say, is to have first and foremost dua. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, asking Him with sincerity to increase you in knowledge and help you in your capability of understanding and memorization, right? Allahumma la ilma lana illa ma 'allamtana. There's no knowledge for us except that which you have taught us. So first and foremost, going to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and making dua, like, Allah, help me to be sincere in seeking knowledge, lift the ignorance from me, allow me to learn your book and have it in my heart, to learn the sunnah of your messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam and have it in my heart and act upon these things, right? Making dua is one of the keys to having stronger hifz. Also the scholars, they say, leaving sinfulness, you know. وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهُ يُعَلِّمَكُمُ اللَّهُ. Fear Allah, have taqwa of Allah, and Allah will teach you. وَإِن تَقُوا اللَّهِ يَجْعَلْ لَكُمْ فُرْقَانًا. If you have taqwa of Allah, Allah will give you the furqan, the criteria. So scholars say having taqwa, leaving the sins, is one of the keys to increasing your hifz, right? And we know the poem by Imam Shafi'i, شكوت إلى وكيعي سوء حفظي فأرشدني إلى ترك المعاصي وقال لي أعلم بأن علم النور ونور الله لا يعطى للعاصي. That I complained to Waki' for the problem of my memorization, and he said to leave the sins, for the knowledge is the light of Allah, and the light of Allah is not given to the sinful one. So the more we leave sin, the easier it becomes to memorize. Also, remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Allah says, وَاذْكُرْ رَبَّكَ إِذَا نَسِيتَ. Remember your Lord if you forget. So some scholars derive from this ayah that remembering Allah, often saying Subhanallah, Alhamdulillah, La ilaha illallah, Allahu Akbar, Astaghfirullah, these type of dhikr will help increase your memory, because Allah says, وَاذْكُرْ رَبَّكَ إِذَا نَسِيتَ. Remember your Lord if you forget, if you have forgetfulness. So literally also is to not be neglectful of remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but some scholars derive from that it will help you increasing your memorization and stop forgetting if you remember Allah often. The third or fourth, not to eat too much, you know, because the scholars, they say the more you eat, the heavier you feel, right? The more you will sleep, the lazier you will feel sometimes, and your hifz won't be as strong. So you'll see that, subhanAllah, a lot of the countries or places where the hifz is really strong, they don't have that much luxury for food. You know, like look in Somalia, how many people memorize the Quran so easily, because look at their diet, they're not eating that much, they don't have that much to eat all the time. Mauritania, the same thing, right? They're known for having strong hifz. So the scholars, they say to decrease the amount of food that you have so you can increase your memorization. Like don't overstuff yourself, basically, right? Exercise also helps to stimulate hifz, you know, making your memory easier to memorize. Not to the point where you're so tired you can't memorize, but something to keep you active. Also, some of the scholars, they say eating some of the sweet things, not too much, but like zabib, they say the raisins, and asal, honey. Some scholars say that has an influence in increasing or helping with your memory. And some scholars also say to stay away from the hamid, which is like lemons and very sour stuff. Allahu a'lam if there's proof behind it, but they say sometimes, you know, with their experience, that these sweet things help more in memorization, and too much sour stuff can decrease. It could be that, yeah. Yeah. He used to say, I think Imam al-Zuhri rahimahullah, من أحب أن يحفظ الحديث فليأكل الزبيب. Whoever wants to memorize the hadith should eat the zabib, the raisins. And then some scholars say the leban, also like good milk, I guess. And then some say al-luban, which is the chewing gum. Yeah. So that's it, inshallah. For one more, of course, like obvious point is to memorize that which is the most beneficial, you know, in levels, which is obviously the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Like a lot of the scholars in the past, they wouldn't accept a student before they memorize the book of Allah, you know, and then after that, certain ahadith, there's books that we can talk about, inshallah, and then, you know, the basics of fiqh. But most importantly, you know, like Kitab Allah, every letter you read from it is at least 10 hasanat, right? And it's a good sign for those who finish the book of Allah on the Day of Judgment. You know, you'll be able to ascend to the high levels. And
is that in terms of you finished it, you memorized it, or you memorized and you understood it, or like and you acted upon it?
It didn't say specifically understanding it. It just said reading it. But the scholars of the Sahaba, anhum, used to understand it as well, obviously because it was in their language, right? And some of them would say like they wouldn't take more than 10 ayah until they understood it, read it, understood it, memorized it, and applied it. Then they'd move on. So understanding is very important as well. Because the Quran is hujjatan laka or alayk. It's a proof for you or against you on the Day of Judgment. Somebody might memorize the whole Quran, and it'll be a witness against him on the Day of Judgment because he didn't apply it, he didn't act upon it. He's like a parrot, he just repeat what he say, but he'll understand it at all. So it's important to apply, obviously, But hifd is a key. Like I wouldn't discourage somebody from memorizing, because inshallah, like we said, the same way you built up your memory, taking it little by little and increasing it, the same way you can build up your understanding. The more you can memorize the Quran first, then start adding the tafsir and then reading a little bit more and getting higher, bigger, stronger, more difficult tafsir and then having a complete picture. So the best of both worlds obviously is to hifd and fahm, understanding and memorization.
Could it be that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that He will preserve His book?
Yes.
Okay, but is also the memorization, the reason why memorization is pushed, is it because to preserve it? Because I was listening to a debate one time, a Muslim sheikh, a Christian guy, and he was talking about the Quran, which one, Bible or Quran, which one? I think it was Sheikh Ahmed Hidar, rahimahullah. And he said, he took the kitab and he was telling the guy in the audience, this is the only book today, if there's no one text left, we can reproduce it like that because we know how many people memorize in the world.
Yeah.
So it's also because just so that it's not lost as far as us.
Yeah, it's one of the Allahu A'lam, one of the asbab or the reasons or ways that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has protected the book of Allah.
Right.
So it's been not only when the Prophet ﷺ received revelation, he would call scribes immediately and have them transcribe what was revealed to him, and also they would memorize it. So there'd be like 10 or 20 or more Sahaba, they'd take the new ayat, memorize it, and then you have how many writers write it down at the same time. So the book of Allah has been preserved through written and through memory. But the memory is like amazing because subhanAllah, no matter what anybody tries to do, there will be memorizers, huffaz, that can tell no, that's not right. This is because their memory is so strong, and all over the world Allah has blessed us with this. We have millions and millions of people that memorize the book of Allah, and to this day, passed on generation to generation. It's a beautiful, like right now I'm studying that with one of my teachers, the science of writing in the Quran and how it was brought down to us. And we look at some of the carbon dated manuscripts they have that date back to the time of the Prophet ﷺ. So no other religion has this type of accuracy and authenticity and historical documents going to the time of the messenger. So it's one of the miracles and a proof for those to come to Islam, inshallah. Yeah.